Good to meet you guys. I'm Zach. So the presentation today, John asked me to put together something about our approach to incorporating AI in our products. So this has been a theme in software across all industries, as you guys have probably noticed. And I think depending on the industry, there are varying levels of sensitivity and implications when it comes to ethics and rollout of AI. And I think in general, ethics is always important, but in an area like healthcare or education, which is the industry that CentralReach is in, it's very important that we make sure that if we're incorporating any sort of algorithms that are recommending things or any usage of data, that all of that is done in a very transparent way, and that we have a good way of communicating how we're thinking about these things, and that we're bringing them into the products in ways that are reasonable, that are helpful for our customers, and ways that don't have the potential to do harm, which could happen. So with that, I think what I wanted to start with is just to open it up to just understand where you all are in terms of keeping up with AI and the recent developments in generative artificial intelligence, just to give some context, because I want to make sure that various parts of the presentation, I could, stay there a little bit longer or go a little bit quicker.
Well, Zach, it is very timely. Just last Thursday night, I had my part 1 introduction to what AI is. And then next month, we'll be getting into the text to image, verbal to image, that kind of generation. And then the month after, or the month after that, we'll be getting into all the risk hazards and deep fakes. So we'll be spending quite a while, and this ties in nicely. And I like your beard.
Thank you. I like yours too.
I used to have one like that, different color.
I think Zach, Andy, how you doing?
Hey, Andy.
I'm hidden behind the screen there.
That's
now, just kind of a high level. Many of us, I'll speak for myself, play around with computers. To those people that do not spend a lot of time with computers, we're propeller heads. We know all about this weird stuff. From my standpoint, I'm not a full-time propeller head. So when you get involved with somebody that does development and building machines and things like that, I sit back with the, oh, wow. What I'm most interested in these days is the simplification and the actual use and practice of this new whiz-bang stuff, whether it's AI or 3D printing or any of the other myriad new things coming to market that are out there, but that are being used in a way that makes sense. 3D printing, for example, that's, wow, you can do all kinds of things. But then when you see them making body parts and some of the other ways of using 3D printing, or when you're talking about AI, and on one level, it's so far beyond anything that a whole bunch of old propeller heads might think about. And then somebody brings it home and says, oh, wait a minute, do you use a phone that has facial recognition? Well, that's using AI. And, that kind of thing. So bringing the technology down to where it's understandable for somebody that's not completely immersed in it 24/7 as a job. Am I making any sense to you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and yeah, definitely appreciate that. And I think that, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I'm off the soapbox now.
I heard a presentation by the CEO of CentralReach, who was talking about their new platform called cari, C-A-R-I, in which they had incorporated artificial intelligence into products that their customers, of which they have 150,000, were using all the time to help these people's productivity and their ability to support people with different disabilities and make it easier. My daughter is a licensed clinical counselor, and she has to fill in insurance forms and do billing. And that's the thing that CentralReach is bringing to those products of theirs. But as Zach said, you have to meet HIPAA guidelines for privacy and security. How can you do that if you're giving your information to an artificial intelligence chatbot somewhere? So it's like, wow, how did they do this? It must have taken dozens of people. And then Zach tells me, no, there's one engineer, right? So this is, how do you do that? How can you accomplish that? What are these products that are so helpful to people?
Yeah, so I think thank you. That's a perfect segue. So I'll kick off the presentation. So I think the big theme that I focused on here, and this is actually a version of a presentation that I gave, I think it was last week in New Orleans. We had a user conference with some of our biggest customers where we were talking about all of the things that we're planning to do in 2024 and the things that our products, do now after the work that we've done in 2023. And these are, groups of people that are very, comfortable using our systems. Some of them are newer customers, some of them are older. And, just kind of talking through, this is what cari is and what it can do for you, and also, how we're thinking about the risks. So I took that presentation, made some modifications to it. And really what I'm focusing on here is the commercialization aspect of how we embed this into features that make it useful to our customers, as you were saying about documentation and things like that. So I have demos toward the end of the presentation, and at the beginning, kind of talk through a little bit more of an intro about CentralReach, and then how these systems are actually working and who's involved. So to start off, the CentralReach mission, so what we're trying to do, and John talked about this a little bit, is to provide cutting-edge solutions that help clinicians and educators to produce outcomes for individuals who have autism or intellectual disabilities. And IDD is an acronym that we use for that. But that could be anything like, needing speech therapy or needing occupational therapy. There's a whole range of customers and clinicians that use our software. And I kind of break this down into two separate functions. So one is to help these users to improve their effectiveness through intuitive and powerful digital tools. And the second is to reduce friction in business processes. And the reason why I split these two out is number two speaks more to the business value. So something like auto-completing your documentation or submitting your claims to an insurance company. Those are things that you need to do in order to stay in business as a clinician, but it's not necessarily something that helps improve the outcome in terms of clinical care or helps you with the programming. Our software does both of those. So we have products that focus on the back office, kind of more to the things that you don't necessarily learn in school, but are necessary to do to stay afloat as a business. And then also with building learning trees and building data sheets and capturing data that can help you track progress as you're teaching. And this is kind of a graphic that we use that just kind of goes through the whole end-to-end workflow is what we kind of refer to this as, coming all the way from the beginning when a learner first gets authorized for therapy, and gets intake into the clinic. Then you schedule an appointment. They collect some data while you're at the appointment, doing some sessions. While you're there, there are a whole bunch of requirements that insurance companies require. They launched a requirement for visit verification, which requires that you put a geolocation stamp on your sessions so that they know that you are where you say you are. Basically, all of this documentation, the purpose of it is to prove, if audited, whether it's by the state for a school or if it's from an insurance company for a clinic, they want to know that if they ask you for records, one, that you're able to provide the records, and two, that the records add up. So they can, dig into it and pull a couple sessions, and they can see, one, that they're not just copied one to the next, and two, that they have, data that, actually lines up with what they say that they should be doing in their plans. Sometimes breakthroughs in technology can come along that are outside of, the scope of our particular industry, and those breakthroughs sometimes are relevant or can be relevant to solving problems that we already know about or problems that we already want to solve in those workflows. One of the biggest common themes when it comes to problems in our industry is an unequal supply and demand. And when I refer to that, I use economic terms, but it's not really economic. It's more in terms of the amount of labor force relative to the amount of need for services. So unfortunately, there is an ever-growing number of people who are being diagnosed with autism or related conditions that make it difficult to gain independence. So these, we're talking about people that could be anywhere from nonverbal, that are completely unable to communicate, or people that, just have difficulty learning, whether it's social skills or other practical functional skills that would be necessary for them to move out of their family's home, or to, remember to pay their bills or do the things that they would need to do to stay safe and independent in their lives. And therapy is proven very effective for this, but it's very difficult, and it's a hard job to do, and it takes a lot of education to get to the point where you can do the therapy. So unfortunately, there's not enough therapists and not enough clinics to do the jobs that are necessary to give the services. So that's kind of where a company like CentralReach comes in, where we can provide technology that helps them save time, save money as well, and provide more services with the same amount of people. So how do we think about AI and its role in our applications? So one of the things that we want to make very clear, because there's a lot of fear in our industry and in a lot of industries about job replacements or about AI kind of taking its own initiative to make decisions. And, if the AI decides to, write a note a certain way, or if it decides to, recommend a certain skill to teach, does that mean that the AI is then going to be teaching our children? And what if the AI doesn't teach them the right things? So we want to make it very clear that that's not what we're trying to do with this. What we're really trying to do is automate the aspects of the business that are, things that you have to do that are deterministic, and things that are the clinician will always have the decision at the end of the day on what actually gets approved and submitted. So instead, what we envision is a world where AI and clinicians work together. So AI doesn't sleep. There's a lot of benefits to an AI, that it can be crunching this data. We call the therapists that go into the field registered behavior technicians. So if they're out in the home and they're working with a child, and they are authorized for an hour of service while they're there, and they're working with a child for that hour, they talk to the parent at the end, they get the parent's signature, and then they leave the home, and now they're driving and they're going to the next place that they need to go. the AI could be already writing a note that is drafted that they could then go and review later, as opposed to them having to write the note, which they're actually not paid for. So that's not billable time by insurance providers. They may be paid by their employer and by the clinic, but that is a bill at a loss that's not being reimbursed. So, you know, our goal is to put cari at the center of this workflow, and anywhere where it makes sense, you know, infusing this intelligence to facilitate the decision making and to facilitate the documentation to speed everything up. Some basic rules of engagement. So we put together some principles that we're using to guide our the way that we're designing and releasing this software. So number one, it needs to be secure, but it also needs to be flexible. So one thing that we don't want to do is tie ourselves to one model or one vendor. Like OpenAI is very kind of, they're famous now after they launched ChatGPT. There's a lot of other vendors and models out there. They're all very useful for different purposes, but we want to make sure that we can be flexible, and also that we have layers of protection between us and those companies that we're using, whether it's taking open source models and running them on premise, or if it's using a cloud provider, but through layers of API that can separate out the information so that it's not identifiable to the end user. We also wanted to leverage our proprietary data set. So CentralReach has over 3 billion data points of clinical data. That is the largest in the industry. And so we want to make use of this data to try to make better decisions, because this is more data than, you know, any person can have in their head at one time. It's more data than you know, a practice on its own can have. So we want to be able to package that up and put it in the hands of the providers. We also want to limit interference from the general training data within some of these models. So the way that a model like GPT-4, which is the newest language model by OpenAI, this is trained on basically all of the internet's data that's been cleaned up, packaged up, and then fed into the model. And then they've done some additional training and review to try to teach the model to, you know, focus on certain areas of that data or prioritize different things. But not all of that is important to us. Not all of it is true. Also, you could ask ChatGPT a lot of questions and it could give you very confident answers that are confidently wrong, but it says it very eloquently. And so we want to make sure that whatever we build doesn't have that tendency or minimizes that tendency by building it on our own data. So in order to do that, we want to do rigorous vetting by subject matter experts. And one of the good things about CentralReach is we have a team of over 50 board certified behavior analysts, which are doctor level providers within the field that are not only experts in running these businesses that are our customers, but they're also experts in behavior and best practices. A lot of them sit on ethics committees and boards themselves. And a lot of them actually came from our customers and ended up deciding to work with us to help the rest of the industry. And then we want to make sure that the organization always has control and configuration of the settings of these models and gets to choose where they want to apply automations and where they don't want to. This is just a snapshot of some of the behavior analysts that we have on staff that are actively working on building and vetting these models. So these are not the engineers. We have a big team of engineers and quality assurance engineers. We also have user experience designers and product managers like myself on the technology side. But these are the people that at the end of the day will decide when things are good to go and when they're not. So when we're building and testing these models, we're building them internally first and allowing this group to basically come in, run some test cases, vet the model, try to break it. And if they break it, we come back, we do some more iteration, and we stay in that cycle until we feel comfortable that we can release it to a beta with some close trusted customers, that they know that they're willing to test it out. They roll it out to a small subset of their users, so they don't, put it in the hands of the newest, staff that's just come out of university. So we make sure that we are very careful about how we're releasing this. We've also put together a scientific advisory board. So this is separate from the faces that you just saw, with the exception of Dr. Rick Bina, who's actually on both. And this is actually a board that we've compiled to oversee everything that we do at CentralReach from a research perspective. So if there's anything clinically related, so this is a little bit less so on the reduction of friction side of our value proposition. But on the clinical side, they're kind of going to be setting best practices and ethical guidelines. Just to pick one of these names, Dr. Jim Partington, the face in the middle top, he actually created two of the most used assessments for autism in the space. So we have a lot of expertise in here that we're not only baking into the models, but also using on the back end to stress test. I kind of skipped that. So now I have a quick segment where I'm going to talk about the process of how we're actually training these models. So there's two pieces of this. One is teaching the AI to actually reference our data and to think like our experts. And that comes from embedding knowledge into the data. So you can kind of think of this like long-term memory. So we have all sorts of data sources within the company, whether it's assessment data, it's curriculum data. We also have parent training resources. We have what we call CR Institute, but this is essentially staff training, where if you are a technician that's training to become a BCBA, you can go through this to kind of learn, the principles of behavior and about ABA. So what we do is we take this knowledge, we take through these 3 billion financial, operational, and clinical data points, and we embed it directly into the model so that when you're talking to it, it's searching over that data. So a lot of the language models that we're using perform kind of a version of search that ends up being transformed into text that is human readable and understandable. And what we can do is we can take some of those models and the interfaces that they provide that make them, understandable in the translation layer, and build it on top of the data points so that let's say you have past assessments that follow certain criteria, certain skills, that you're always referencing those skills and that the AI doesn't go out of the bounds of those content areas and start making up its own assessment. So once we build the AI on top of the data that's been created and curated by experts, then we need to make it useful. So this is where we actually embed it into the product. So we do this by adding additional context. So you can think of this kind of like short-term memory. So things like session data, learner profiles, assessment scores, configurations that the organization may have set in place, or preferences. So this then gets loaded in to tell the model, okay, you know how assessments work, you know how a curriculum is built, but how do we customize that for a particular learner given this session that we just had? So then we load this in as well on the side. And from that, we can then generate some recommendations and some suggestions that the clinician can review and either agree to can disagree, can delete, can change, can modify. Then we can capture all that data, take it back, and then we see that as feedback that we can then use to improve the model. So as a visual, which I think the other slides are a bit difficult to follow, we take the knowledge, embed it into cari. We then take the context from the applications as you're using it, load that into cari as well. And so when you make a request as the user, you can then get a response. We can take that response then as CentralReach and review those with our expert team to then tune the way that we load the context and tune the data that's in the databases that we use for expert knowledge, as well as tune the model itself to be able to give better responses the next time that you query it. So I'll pause there. The rest of the slides are proofs of concept. So going through some of the work that we've done around the actual features within the application that we're building. So the kind of boring stuff is behind us now, and the exciting stuff is a little bit more in front. But does anyone have any questions so far? We can talk a little bit more after the demos too, but.
Was this approach to the way to bring the data in something that originated with CentralReach, or are there many other published places that people have been doing this way?
Yes, this is a very standard practice. So this is a graphic that we've put together, and it's a process that we've tuned to, work with our products and with our data. But the general framework of doing this is something that is very typical for using machine learning and for building products on AI. All right, so we can open it up for more questions at the end, but to do a couple of proofs of concept, and each of these kind of goes in order from levels of maturity. So the earlier ones, like this one, this is actually in a beta test right now with multiple customers and kind of growing by the week, actually. So this one's actually live today. We're being very careful about the rollout, as I was saying, to not push it to all of our users at once, but to the ones that are the most excited and ready. We are launching some of these products. So this one is live. So this is a bot that is being used. I referenced CR Institute, our training for staff. So this is being used with CR Institute, trained on transcripts from a particular course within that is used to teach RBTs, which are usually around, they're earlier in their career. So they haven't gotten their doctorate, they haven't taken the test to become a BCBA, but some of them may want to. So we have a course that helps facilitate their path through that. So it's kind of like additional tutoring.
Zach, what does BCBA mean?
Oh, yes, sorry. BCBA stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst. And the board refers to and this is going to be very confusing, the BACB, which is a board that basically exists to certify behavior analysts. So they are the, kind of be all and end all when it comes to getting your certification to work in the industry to actually take on patients.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the D, so the -D, there's different levels of BCBA. So there's a BCBA level that is technically not a doctor, and then there's a BCBA D that is a doctor. So there's additional differentiation within that. And so the way that we built this one, so it's very customized in terms of the base system level prompts for the language model. And then it's been refined and fine-tuned by taking Q&A pairs that going back to our expert panel, they've basically gone in and asked it a bunch of questions. It's given answers, and then we've rated the feedback. And then based on that feedback, we've picked some of those conversations to load in as examples so that it can get better. So that's one of the ways that we've fine-tuned and refined it, in addition to embedding the transcripts and the actual core data that's in the course. So I have a quick animation of this, and this is an actual transcript of the bot. So she says, you know, I just finished my course. I need more practice. Can you help me? And the bot says, sure. The RBT says, I need help with ABC data collection. And Cari says, yes, let's start with this scenario. And I apologize, this moved way too fast. But essentially, she's saying, I need help with ABC. And ABC is a framework that clinicians use to try to diagnose the function of behavior. So ABC stands for antecedent behavior and consequence. And in order to identify why a learner might be behaving a certain way, let's say that they are throwing things, and every time you go to them, go to the grocery store with them, they start, you know, throwing cereal boxes. And you want to understand, why are they throwing cereal boxes? Because there may be a bunch of reasons for this. And a lot of the times people get the function of the behavior wrong. And so they might think that, you know, they're doing it because, you know, they think it's fun, which could be, they might be doing it because they're angry. There's a whole bunch of reasons, but sometimes the reason is attention, and a lot of the times it's attention. And so sometimes you can give what you think is punishment, and it's actually reinforcement because you're actually giving them attention. So it's side anecdote, but so this bot essentially helps them role play, and it also helps them answer questions about the course. So the second one, and this is also, this has actually been updated. So this was research in progress. It's actually in beta now with one of our products. So we have a smaller product that's for smaller businesses, and then we have an enterprise product that's for larger businesses. This has gone out with the smaller business product, and will, within the next few months, start to be rolled out with our enterprise product. So this one is actually the one that John was referencing earlier, or very similar. So every time that a therapist goes to have a session with a learner, they need to be documenting everything that happens within that session. And part of that is collecting data on what happens and what the client is doing for clinical purposes. So they'll graph that data and they'll say, you know, I'm teaching this particular skill, and how often did they get the skill right? If I'm asking them to identify animals, let's say, how often did they point to the correct animal? Did they require prompting? Did they need me to help kind of suggest where they need to look or eliminate some options that might be confusing to them? Sometimes it may be a task analysis where you're asking them, you know, let's say something like doing laundry, and you're tracking how far they can go without additional help. So they'll be tracking all of that data and also taking additional notes. This is exceptionally complicated and difficult too, because you don't have full control, obviously, of what the child does. So you could be teaching a session and they could, you know, at any point run away. They could, you know, start throwing things. They could bite you. They could do a lot of different things. This happens very frequently. So they'll also want to track that data. At the end of it, they need to put this into a specifically formatted report that can be shown to an insurance company, to the state, that they can log away so that if they're audited, they can show what happened. So we built a system that will generate a session note based on the data that is provided. So in this one, I'm sorry, I need to fix this demo. But if we look at the second line, they're observing 3 incidents of aggressive behavior from Sid. So it took the actual behaviors that were, and this is a real transcript from real data in the system. And so there were 3 data points that were collected. And in the actual UI, we show this side to side so that the clinician can review and see, I've got these 3 incidents of aggressive behavior that I see in boxes in the UI. And then I also see in the note that it's referenced these 3. One of the important things that we did with this is we allowed the clinician to edit and change the note right from here. So, and if they do that, we always capture what they've changed it to. So we can then review that and see, they took in A as a recommendation and they changed it to B. So that means that A was wrong and something changed between those 2. And we can take that as a pair that can allow us to train the model to improve over time. And then, so now we're getting a little bit more kind of further into the future. So this is something that we haven't rolled out yet, but we are in the process of designing and kind of thinking about, how we're going to execute it. We have a couple proofs of concept, but this one's a little bit earlier. So we have an assessment tool that is used not for diagnosing these conditions. So whenever the clinicians and customers are using our software, the clients are already diagnosed. So it's not that kind of an assessment, but it's an assessment of skill ability over time. So you may want to have a baseline assessment when you first bring in a client and understand, okay, they've got, this level of skills. And if I teach them for 6 months, I want them to have this level of skills. And since the assessment is standardized in a way that the curriculum, the data that you might be collecting in each session, it isn't. So the assessment is more standardized. That can allow you to do comparisons over time and then also do comparisons across cohorts in ways that you might not be able to do otherwise. So that's the kind of product pitch overall. But what we want to do with AI with it is to be able to select and draft assessment scores using cari by taking in the data that you've collected from your sessions and from past assessments. And the reason why we want to do this is we've acquired a couple popular assessments. I referenced Dr. Jim Partington in an earlier slide. He created the ABLES-R and the AFLS, which those stand for the Assessment for Basic Language and Learning Skills Revised, and the Assessment for Functional Living Skills, respectively. And each of those have different purposes, and there are multiple sections in there. But all told, the number of skills and questions that are in those assessments is over 3,000. So if you are a clinician trying to decide, how do I build an assessment for my client, you don't have time to assess all 3,000. So you need to pick a focus area, but you're not billed for that selection. So what we did was 2 things. One was to build a conversational interface where you could do an assessment that is easier than using our UI. So you could go in, pick your client. You could tell it could detect the past history. So here it says, I've noticed that you've got some assessments in the past. Would you like to use these? And so they can choose. They can say yes or no. I do want to use that. I don't want to use that. And then you can provide additional context. And you can say, this is specifically what I want to focus on with this assessment. And that prompt can allow it, we think of it kind of like a search. So you're putting in this search criteria to say, which skills should we be focusing on here? And then also using the past history to search through and find the scores that might most closely match the scores that have happened in the past. And what that ends up manifesting in, and this is our actual software and what it looks like. So this is what clinicians use to do their scoring. So in orange, we have different colors. When you actually score it as a clinician, it shows up as green. But in orange here, we have the draft scores. And this is a function that exists irrespective of AI. So we built this a long time ago. It was actually built prior to the acquisition of the assessments. And what it was initially designed to do was to invite a parent or invite a contractor therapist to come in and suggest scores based on what they're seeing. And then the clinician can come in and review the drafts and then approve or deny or change based on what they actually see in the session. So it just basically gives kind of like a step stool to, start a starting point that you can then move from. But none of these scores can be finalized until the clinician actually comes in and gives their score on top of it. And they, always have the option of clearing these out. This one is a video, so it's a little bit easier for me to show. Okay. So you can see here too, one of the things that we wanted to do is make it so that since these language models they actually do better. This isn't something that I included in the training slides, but they perform better if you ask them to explain their reasoning at each step. And a byproduct of that is you actually get the explanation. And so one of the things that we're looking into doing is using the notes and using the features that are already in our platforms, take that output and put it in here and attribute it to the assistant. So, here it says, Charlie has exhibited disruptive behaviors in every session this month, recorded in CentralReach. Zach Sullens, assuming he's a clinician, also specified that when creating this assessment, that Charlie still struggles with managing disruptive behaviors. Past assessments also indicate that he's exhibited these behaviors. Therefore, I've drafted a score of 0 because the problem seems likely to still persist. And the skill here is disruptive behaviors. So it's looking at all of these sessions and saying, well, I see disruptive behaviors over here. You said he doesn't do very well here. Well, here's a skill, asking how well he does, and lining those up. The last one, and this is probably the farthest into the future that we have, at least in this slide deck. One of the things that we tried to do is we have a product called Care Coordinator, which our customers use to give parent training and to communicate with parents. And we have, as part of that, a whole bunch of transcripts, very similar to the training bot at the beginning, that we decided to use. We figured what would happen if we embedded that into the model and imagined that a parent is talking to this assistant to try to learn about ABA in the same way that a therapist might. And the reason why I said that this is further into the future is the levels of risk that you introduce, the closer you get to the actual parent or the patient, the more risk there is that, let's say that this assistant, didn't give the right output and it suggested something that was wrong about ABA, and that came from our system direct to a parent. That could be a big problem. So this one is a little bit, more hypothetical into the future. But that being said, the demos that we did and the stress testing that we did with it proved very, very promising. So this is the output from the assistant. So it kind of had this tagline or thing at the beginning that it gave, and we uploaded a document from a training of ABA services for children aged 0 to 5. So it referenced that at the beginning, and then we got 4 questions from a therapist that is frequently asked questions that they've heard a lot from parents. So when will my child be done with ABA? How will you fit all of the ABA into their schedule? And I don't know if I mentioned it, but ABA is applied behavior analysis. What types of things will they learn, and will they be sitting at a table the whole time? So we, put all that into the LLM, and it replied with this. And, I won't read all of it, but it is here and luckily easier to read than the past ones. I apologize again for that. But I did highlight the second one because we were very impressed by its analogy of fitting into the schedule as a puzzle, because that was not something that we actually trained into the algorithm. What we trained was, it understanding, what it takes to, do ABA, trained it on, the output and, giving good answers. But, we didn't specifically focus on it being able to give, a very human-like analogy of a puzzle. But all of these answers were directly in line with what a BCBA would be giving as a response. We took it a step further and we said, okay, well, what if you have a therapy clinic and you have clients that don't speak your language? Could we use this technology and ask it to translate? And so we did the translation, and we found asked some folks in the company that are native Spanish speakers to review this, because there are things that, if you speak different languages, then you'd know that there may be things that do make sense from an exact word point of view, that maybe it's a direct translation, but there might be some cultural differences or some things that it'll miss and not understand. For the most part, with our tests, we didn't see that. And, that putting the caveat there that we would need a lot more testing before we got this to the point where we would actually launch anything like this. But in this particular transcript, as an example, we found one instance where it was not exactly how a human would talk. All of the information was still correct. None of it was, really culturally incorrect. But it did say, this ajustar is the infinitive form, and it really should have used a different form of the verb. And it's a little bit odd for it to say the ABA rather than just saying ABA. But that's the type of errors that we were noticing in the translations. And then the last thing that I'll show is we thought, well, let's take it to a greater extreme and just see, what we can ask it to do. And this one was more for fun. And we said, explain this in English like I'm 5, but speak like a pirate. And it did it. And what it came back with was still, in terms of semantic meaning, was still accurate to what a BCBA would say, but now it talks like a pirate. So if it was talking to a learner, or if it was giving a parent something that, you could imagine they're reading to a child, like maybe they love pirates, and, a way to get through to them or listen to it is to, speak like their favorite pirate. It does have built-in abilities to translate into tone of voice in that way. When, I don't know in this realm how practically useful that'll be in the near term, but we thought it was fun. And that's all I've got for today. I think now we could, open it up to Q&A. Any questions that you guys have.
Zach, have you tried this with any family, with any real patients or families? Outside of the company, my basic question is, what is the reaction to it? Because like a couple of years ago with the COVID, there was a big stink about, my daughter's does special education. And there was a big stink because these kids who had a specialized education program where they were supposed to have so much physical contact and so much one-on-one personal care, now didn't get it. There was no school. So they weren't getting that. And, so if you take somebody that's used to, that needs the personal touch, but now you're basically being relegated to a machine, Or somebody that's content using a machine says, well, why do I need a real person if I can just go online and do this? So I'm kind of curious how the reception is to what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I would say that the first reaction that I have to that is we have no intention of replacing the clinicians or the teachers. So this would not be something that a learner would be interfacing with, at least at this time in the foreseeable future for CentralReach. And I have seen some demos outside of CentralReach that are pretty exciting, where they actually have robots that can do some of the teaching, and in some cases some research has shown that that can be beneficial to some learners, because sometimes they have such an aversion to social interactions that in some contexts that could be helpful. But none of that is included in the scope of what we're researching or working on. All of what we're building and researching and designing is all to help the clinicians basically save time and to make decisions more quickly. And that, in essence, will allow them over time to spend more time with the learner. Because if we're able to use these tools to compile documentation for them, we have a tool called Schedule AI, which I didn't include in this presentation, but it basically helps them plan their scheduling so that they can slot people in at the right times and make sure that they're saving, that effort, which in terms of logistics for an admin, that takes a lot of admin time. And being able to do it efficiently also saves time, because you're, slotting those events in the most efficient, optimized way that you can. So all of these tools, in essence, over time, will reduce the amount of time that the clinician needs to spend with their technology, so that they can focus more on the human interactions that they're having in the school or in the clinic. So that's more the vision that we have of the future and what we want to promote, because we ultimately agree with that sentiment that it is very helpful to have human-to-human interaction. And it depends, and it is individualized. So in schools they have IEPs and individualized education programs specifically for that reason, and the reason why they are taken out of class in a lot of cases to have one-on-one interactions is you don't necessarily know what they're behind on. They may be up to speed on a bunch of the skills, but they're just falling behind in one or two areas. And if those areas happen to be social, then it's very important, even just from a logical perspective, that they'll need to be able to work with real people. So we don't want to replace those situations where they really do need human contact.
Thank you.
Of course.
You need agents with skin on them.
Go ahead. Lewis had a question. Go.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm a chess player, and computers started playing chess many, many years ago. And the good players always beat the computers, but not today anymore. Even the world champion loses to these computers. Is that based on AI?
It's a different AI than the ones that we work on and build, but yes, it does use algorithms, and it is very impressive. I like to play chess too, and it is crazy the things that it can come up with. And I think Kasparov was the first one to officially be beat as leading grandmaster, and ever since then, it's only gotten better. So, yeah, they've long surpassed human ability.
Also, I like the fact that that you can write a book and the AI can review it and make corrections, right? But you still have to go over those corrections to make sure it's well written. I like that. The other one thing that I like is that you mentioned is the ability to translate from English to Spanish or any other language, even though you still have to go back and do some double checking. So I like that. So at one point, I think you mentioned aggressive behavior. Who was aggressive, the AI or the user?
Ah, yes. Sorry, it was not the AI. So the aggressive behavior referenced in the assessment was aggressive behavior of the learner or the child or the client. So this is in the assessment, you will be, in some cases, let's say that you have a child that comes into the clinic and the parent says, I can't go anywhere with my child because, he keeps hitting me. And you want to track that. So it would be that type of scenario.
Also, the last
Zach,
one.
I have a question. Is this used in the school system, or you have use for it in the school system? Because the school system already has in process, what they call an IEP, Individual Educational Plan. Now, the clinician being out there in the field, or the therapist being out there in the field sometimes, doesn't have time to enter the data at the same time working on the child. And as we all know from visiting our doctors are spending all their time on the computer and not even looking at us face to face, doing less hands-on treatments and therapies and just touching us to find out if that part of the body works anymore or not. So my question is, do you incorporate an IEP, and how, when the clinician or the therapist is actually working in the field, do they in fact save time if they're at the same time concentrating and working with the child?
Yeah. Okay. So great questions, all of them. So the first one on IEPs and school system. So in terms of the current state of rolling out the AI, we haven't rolled it out into our education product, but we do have one. And so we have a product that we call Lifted, and it is basically an extension of the IEP systems. So a school may have a system in New Jersey. Frontline is very popular as a technology platform to manage your IEP goals. But those systems usually manage the high level goals of what you're committing to teach within a certain period. So if you have a 6-month IEP period, you'll say, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D goals. And you log that away, and then you put in your reports at the end of it. But it doesn't track the day-to-day sessions or classes that you're having with the children. And so we do have a product that handles that piece of it, where they can, and the UI is designed in such a way that, you can set up your session ahead of time, and you can have, I'm going to work on these activities and these skills, maybe there's 10 of them and they're all aligned with those goals that are in your IEP, that they're kind of building blocks that help you get to the point where you can achieve the goals that you're promising to do within the IEP, and then generate reports that can be uploaded to those IEP systems. And it's all shown within a user interface that is designed to be as easy to use as a user interface can be. It's not perfect, but it does, in most cases, it's faster than taking things on pen and pencil, and it just kind of allows you to, with single taps or clicks, to just increment or decrement the values on those different skills. And within the clinical environment, so going to the second part of the question of in the field and how we collect that data, we have a mobile product that exists as an application that's native on the phone. So a therapist can take a phone or an iPad with them and kind of have that off to the side with those same kind of boxes that, you've got skill A and you've got that open on your screen, and you'll be teaching and working with the child. And let's say that you ask them to do something and they do it, you can then click on the screen that says, yes, they did it. Or if you ask them to do something and they don't do it, and you prompt them, you can then tap the screen and then tap a preset prompt that explains, I had to kind of nudge their arm towards where they needed to go, or, give an additional suggestion of where to go.
Would you expect Would you expect
Teaching
to
is-
also use speech input for that?
So I think so that's very interesting. There's two, so I would say speech and also video are two places that we haven't explored yet that personally I think have a lot of potential. So speech inputs, you can, if you are, writing notes in the application, you can transcribe that. So similar to what, surgeons might do in the operating room. We haven't seen a lot of adoption or usage of that because a lot of the times it might be confusing if you're in the session with the child. So it might be helpful after the fact, in that scenario that I gave where, maybe they're driving to their next appointment and, they just want to take some notes. That could be a use case where we might, use something like that and then incorporate that into the session note that we demoed earlier. One of the other areas that I think could be interesting maybe in the coming years is video behavior analysis. And this would have, it's a whole other, stream of research that would need to be done on it. But it does feel to me that although I think our digital interfaces are very helpful, they're better than not having them because they do allow you to do all of these things with documentation and have a lot of other features that come along with it. I think the best scenario would be for therapists to just be in the room with the learner and not look at a computer at all, or very, very minimally. And so to your point, Fred, about, you're sitting in the room with the doctor and they're not even looking at you, that doesn't feel like an ideal world. So it does feel to me
that's the real world today, though.
I know it's a real world, but maybe not an ideal one. So there could be some technologies that we could use that could, detect, and we tried this with one of our software platforms that was called ABA Tools. And it still exists today, but it didn't get a whole lot of adoption, where it had digital flashcards and you could show that to the learner and they could actually tap it. And then that takes in the, data on its own so that you don't have to actually do it as the clinician.
Can I bring up a point? Zach,
Yep.
you mentioned about, and Fred mentioned about doctors not touching you and being in the same room. But we have technology now where a cardiac surgeon could operate on your heart using virtual reality where he's halfway around the world.
It's true.
Okay, that was my thought.
Teaching is a little bit different. Teaching young children in particular.
Yeah.
You don't teach them something one time and expect them until age 18 to really absorb what you've implemented into them and inspired them when they were younger. So setting the goal is a variable with young children. Teaching is a variable. And I know the objective in all these things is to quantify it, but there's a quality to learning too. One of the things about teaching children who have language difficulties is, can they repeat a sentence using 3 words and 4 words and 5 words with consistency? And the word consistency is a qualitative thing, even though, yes, you can measure it, because today they do it. Next week, they don't do it. Next week, they still don't do it. Eventually, they do it. And then you got to define this word consistency. At what level does AI say it's learned versus true, false, or 1, 2, 3? Quantification of data is easy, but when you're working with a real live individual, it's not so easy. So how does AI implement this word consistency? How do you really determine when a goal has been reached?
Yeah, that's another good question. So I would say that within our systems and with our plans today, we're not using the AI to decide on that level of consistency. So we actually reference a rules engine that's in our CentralReach platform that the clinicians and the practices set on their own to decide what those thresholds are. So they'll look at, if we're taking that speech behavior, they'll set where the phases are and what the threshold for phase change might be, and we can choose whether or not to automate that skill. And part of the reason that we do that is for the consistency, but part of it's also for generalization and maintenance. So if you have that scenario where you're trying to teach them to, request something or to say a certain phrase, they might do it once in a certain context, or they might do it really well within a certain context. But then, they did it in school, but now when they go home, they don't do it anymore. And, it's not tied to that environment. So there are a lot of complexities that are introduced when you're trying to decide, at what level do you master a skill? And this is something that, when we talk with our subject matter expert team, it came up yesterday on a call. It comes up all the time, and it's a very big theme that I think is difficult to answer. And when we think about assessments, this is another place where, something that there's BCBA, her name's Kristen, something that she says, all the time is, it just because somebody has scored highly or scored the maximum of a score within one of our assessments, that doesn't mean that they've mastered the skill necessarily. So you can't necessarily take from the data point within our systems and extrapolate definitively that they absolutely know the skill, because it's intangible. So there is a lot of fuzziness there, and that is why at the end of the day, we always put the clinician in the driver's seat. So if the AI is suggesting something, the clinician will always be the final decider. And if we're not using AI, then the reason that we might not use it, besides, if there's a technical limitation, even if it is possible and we still decide not to do it, then it would be for reasons like that.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Gilbert. As a computer programmer, I'm kind of wondering what languages you use, or do you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So our various products actually are coded in different languages. A lot of them use, well, it depends, because they're on a lot of different platforms. So we have some that are mobile. So those, we have a mobile app that's in Xamarin. And we have another mobile app that is in React. And so both of those are helpful because we don't have to code in Swift or in any platform-specific languages. And then for web, we have, I'm trying to think. On the back end of some of our applications, we use Postgres. But I think we've been moving away from that into MongoDB for document storage for a lot of our backend. And then we use API middle layers to talk to the front end, which usually uses, we use .NET for a lot of our products as well from Microsoft. And then I think there's a couple other ones sprinkled in there. For a lot of the AI POCs that we've been doing, we've been using Python, but the Essentials product, the one for smaller businesses, that one uses Ruby on Rails, and we have a programmer that was doing some of the AI stuff in Ruby as well, at least more on the front end.
Okay. Well, I kind of know Python, and but I don't know .NET at all.
Yeah, I know some Python and a little bit of C++. I've done some programming, but I'm not a very good programmer.
Yeah, I have another one. People talk about the potential dangers of AI. What kind of dangers are expected, or you feel that we should worry about?
Yeah, so I think people in general talk about a lot of different dangers of AI, and I think there are a lot of dangers in general of applying AI. For us specifically, I think one of the, I'd say, more interesting dangers that I've heard a lot brought up is over-reliance on the technology. So having clinicians that are not well trained or are not confident in their abilities, or because they're, don't have a lot of time, that they may end up in a situation where they accept, even though we give them the option to modify and accept the suggestions of the AI and accept the documentation without thoroughly reading through it. And so that could result in, even if we don't give the best suggestion, that results in not the best plan. I do believe that there are ways that we can design our software to disincentivize that. So making it, a lot easier to do the modification than to do the final commit. So I think there's a lot of places where we might be able to add some speed bumps into the interactions with the software, that can, kind of make sure that people are always thinking that it's not, too easy to go on autopilot as the clinician. But that's been one that, I've heard fairly frequently, is over-reliance, that if it becomes, good enough, or convincingly good enough, that people may, basically stop studying.
Will the AI ever replace the clinician? No.
My belief is no. Definitely no. Not only that it shouldn't, but also that it can't. I don't think that the teacher or the clinician can ever be brought out, especially when it comes to teaching and to, healthcare. Not only just because it's such an important aspect of development that I certainly wouldn't want any person to be, taught by, some algorithm. I think that's one of the dangers of, things. This is getting more into my personal opinions now, but about, social media and a lot of the applications that are frequently used by, children that are powered by algorithms and AI in the back end that are telling you what you should watch or what you should listen to or what you should, ingest in terms of information. And the information that we have, similar to what I said about the AI, is similar to how we work, that, we take in the experiences that we have and we take in our sensations and perceptions of the world, and we use that to form our worldview. And if the algorithms are pushing us in one direction or another, that can actually change the way that we think, and in some cases who we are and who we think we are. And I think that should be left up to the humans.
Yeah, I am with a Mammoth Medical Center, a hospital. I'm on the board, and they are planning to have AI, and I believe it's for the purpose of administration or keeping track of the patient's data. Also the interface between the doctors and the patient and so forth like that. Seems to be great. Yeah.
Do some of the busy grunt work.
Can I ask a question about security? When the clinician enters data about a client, where does that data reside? Is it secure?
Yes. Yeah. So that is kind of the most foundational principle to every product in CentralReach, is that we frequently go through the products and, make sure that it's HIPAA compliant. And HIPAA compliance has a lot of different aspects to it in terms of security and privacy. Some of that has to do with how the data is stored. We have one of the ways is we have a single sign-on service and a session management system that makes sure that, in terms of access to the software, that it's more difficult to get hacked, essentially. So it's never impossible. There's always the possibility that, a bad actor could get access to certain credentials, or, that a good actor could become a bad actor. There's a lot of different things that could happen. But we do our best to make sure that, if we're using multi-factor authentication or any of the other strategies in terms of accessing the system as a user, that we don't have someone that can, come in and emulate administrator level permissions or, hack things in from the front end. From the back end, we also make sure that, we're very tight on, the access to the data, and make sure that, data that is accessed and viewed by people is done so in a de-anonymized way. So there's a lot of protocols that we have in the company around privacy that will be used for the AI.
Along the same line, even though the information might be anonymous, is the information that one enters, is that utilized in any other way within the system for general purposes? Let's say the AI learns something from working with one particular client and it anonymizes the information. Is that information nevertheless still used somewhere else in the system? Is it an ongoing learning process, or are you basing your learning on a previous model completely?
So currently it's more the second. And so there are, I think in terms of performance, you could get better performance if you added in that we call it PHI, the health information, private health information. If you did add that into the model, it could learn patterns, and we're investigating ways of potentially doing that, but we don't have that in the system today because we don't want to have any, bleeding of a patient's information from one authorized provider into the other, where we could have some risk of, if you're talking to an AI or you're using some part of the system, that suddenly some information could leak in that comes from its past knowledge that you don't know about of some other client that we've added in. So we do want to make sure that that's not something that happens. And to that end, when I mentioned the products that are in beta today, none of those products are using past data that includes PHI. And the reason that it doesn't is to prevent that.
You said, was it accurate that you have one programmer who's working on all of these tools? How many people does it take to implement the stuff across all of your tools? I mean, somebody has to develop the AI knowledge, all those languages that you were speaking. Somebody has to test all that stuff. How many people does that take for the things that you have actually in progress?
Yeah, it's definitely more than one programmer, that's for sure. So we do have a couple of programmers and people that are doing kind of like some of the POCs that we showed, or proofs of concept, were kind of done in a smaller group. But when it comes to actually commercializing them, that I mentioned the subject matter experts that we have, I would definitely include a majority of them in the rollout of all the features. When it comes to integrating this into the products, every product team has any number. Usually the ratio would be about 3 engineers to 1 quality assurance tester to 1 product owner, and there's usually 1 designer that's helping to guide the user interface. And for every product that we have at least 1 of those teams. And for some of the products, like the enterprise product, we have multiple of those teams. And then in addition to that, we also have back-end engineers and DevOps engineers that help us with the deployment. We have, there's a whole, I think I don't remember what the current headcount is of the company, but it's several hundred for sure. And a decent portion of those will be required for the AI.
That might be at the beginning, right? Until they implement the program that's supposed to perform. But once that's done, that you don't need all those people. I'm thinking of say you design it for the hospital and the administration. Once it's designed and it works properly, that stuff is not needed anymore. Is that the way it is? It's only the users work on it.
There's usually it does depend, over time, if we have launched a product and we've reached a certain level of satisfaction with the features and the functions, the performance, in some cases that can allow us to decrease the amount of headcount. One of the reasons why that tends to not happen is because the software that achieves that level of fit usually ends up being more in demand, which means that there's more people that end up trying to access it, and those people may have other wants and needs, so they'll have different requests, and so then we'll have to find ways of still servicing the customers that we have from the past while also supporting the new customers, and we'll then have additional traffic that's coming through the system. So there's performance upgrades and what we usually call technical debt that you rack up over time in the addition of features or in the changes that you make, that you then need to go back and make changes, whether it's to the infrastructure or to the software design that allows it to run smoothly.
And I think also you'll be looking at AI changing in its very nature. I mean, here we are today. Look what has happened since last November with just ChatGPT. And it's a rapidly changing field. So while we're talking about AI in your product, AI is not fixed. AI is going to be constantly changing. So you're going to have to adapt, and your needs back at the hospital or in a school system, that's going to change too. I mean, it's nothing static. It's not like designing a database. I think even if it were a database, even the nature of the database may change. The government has a say in this too. They designate now. Now you go for a simple thing like a blood test and a chest x-ray. They're asking you your sexual orientation. They never did that before. There has to be a new slot on the form that they fill in. So things are rapidly changing on both ends, in the medical field, in the educational field, and AI is just playing a part of it. It's going to be a dramatic change, hopefully for the good.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Things are changing all the time. I mean, even in, you mentioned since last November, there are models that are announced almost every week now. So there are things that are changing very, very rapidly.
And the AI train a group of clinicians at the same time on a classroom, for instance?
How do you mean?
I just meant you talk about training clinicians, right? So but you talk about one. But can you do a group of clinicians at the same time?
I mean, that's interesting. We can run it multi-threaded, so we could have multiple independent sessions running, but I don't think in its current implementation we've set it up to have like a group session where you could almost be in a group chat with it. But it does sound interesting. We could think about it.
You mean like if you had several clinicians who were working with the same client, several therapists working with the same client who wanted to have a group call, so to speak, and all be looking at the same thing. They would just share the screen like with Zoom or something, right?
Zoom, yeah.
So you don't need, I mean, the thing about, one of the things that you mentioned, Zach, about having these 3 billion data points, even when you look at one thing, if a clinician comes in and has a new client and has to assess that client, and they've never had any experience with somebody who's behaving the way that person is, your background data gives them the experience of the world to ask, I have somebody who behaves like this. What's the normal way of dealing with this? Even though they've never seen such a person or behavior before.
In behavior,
Theoretically,
John, there's no such definitive way of describing behavior. It's been tried for years and years and years. The whole process of learning. Look at what's happening in our world today. I mean, if you could pinpoint and give me a reason why certain things are happening, you'd be a billionaire, trillionaire. It's very hard to pin down behavior, in my opinion, if ever. I mean, we work individually, we work with our family, we work with our children. We want the best for our children. We want them to be good and kind in this God-forgotten, mean world out there. And it's crazy. It's really crazy what's going on. If you can predict behavior with any kind of software, God bless you.
Well, the thing is that if you can ask a question and get some ideas back, it may give you some ideas. I mean, even a clinician with many years of experience can get some new client in who has a new behavior that they are not familiar with. And they could have used to go and talk to their other clinicians that they work with and things like that and say, have you ever seen this? And that's what you'd be saying to this system, because it's accumulating knowledge from every interaction that's being recorded in it. And that's how now you can ask a chat GPT and it goes and looks at the whole of history of the internet to get some kind of single answer instead of giving you 1,013 things you have to scroll through. So
there is no single answer. Part of what's going on now, from my perspective, what I see with AI is no different than with a lot of the computer programming that went on. It came into being and was used to supposedly take care of a problem or aimed at fixing an issue or something that was going on. And then it mushroomed into so many different forms. Computers are being used today for things that nobody ever would have thought about.
The first thing, Andy, just to quickly interject, the first thing the computers were used for, to play games.
Yes, but it's going beyond that. We're at a point now where a lot of people are jumping up and down about privacy, whether it's HIPAA or GDPR or anything else, and the idea that no, you're not forced into agreeing to these terms and conditions, but if you don't want it, if you don't sign it, you don't get the service. Where these companies basically own your data in perpetuity, and they can do whatever they want. That's starting to take a step back now. The government's stepping in and saying, no, you can't do some of these things. There have been laws that have been talked about in Congress on restricting what companies can do with personal information. And so when you take what's going on with AI, both now and in the future, it's so multifaceted with the privacy, with the potential for what's going on now, that the way it can be changed in the future. Who's going to come up with the next, come up with a new set of letters for something new that was never even thought of? Technology sufficiently advanced, indistinguishable from magic. And last comment from way back when, you're talking about measuring data, these millions of data points. I think it was Edward Deming was the father of quality circles after World War II. He got involved with helping Japan rebuild after World War II. And one of his basic premises was you have to measure the right thing. Fred, I think you were talking about it earlier with, you can get all kinds of data and you can quantify it, but is it really telling you anything? The models that are being built, you have to measure the right thing. Forget about how many calls or how long the average call took, or how much money you put in your pocket. Bottom line, did it help the business?
Well, the IEP that I mentioned earlier, the Individual Educational Plan in the school system, that emanates from a child study team. Child study team involves, professionals, clinicians, whatever, speech therapists, behaviorists, but it also involves the parent. Now, Zach, I never heard you mention anything about, this is all for the clinician, but the factor X, of course, is the parent, who may or may not, and most likely does not understand, doesn't care about AI, is concerned about their child. Now, the IEP does have objective measures. Like I said, can the child repeat a 3-word sentence and then a 4-word sentence and so forth? So while the objectives can be quantified, the parent could care less about that. They see their child, they observe certain things, and they're conveying that in words and not in quantity. So I think it's got a long, long way to go. A long way to go to determine, behavior, education. The learning process is if we had the answers to education, everybody would be geniuses by now, and everybody would be well behaved by now. And it's not the case. I'm not optimistic.
Speak for yourself. We're all well behaved. You're the rowdy one. Zach, the good note, on a friendly note. You're never going to be unemployed.
We're taught to think out of the box. Now we're talking about with education, we want them to be back in the box. But you guys who are programmers and techie guys, you're taught to be out of the box. You're supposed to think about the thing that's going to break the system, not to make it work. Now here we're talking about making, with education, and we're talking about medical field, you want things to work. You don't want to break it. Let the testers break it and fix it. There's a lot of things they can't fix, so.
It's true. Yeah, no, I think so. That's another debate that we have a lot, is about, there's a term, outcome-based therapy that's very popular, and it's kind of a holy grail kind of thing of the industry, of trying to get to a point where you can align all of the goals that are being worked on the very tactical, specific level, and communicate that and align that in a way to the real true outcome that you want, which is to have the parent and ultimately the individual be satisfied and feel more confident and independent in their lives, which is like intangible metrics that are not things that are easily measurable. So what the mapping between those, and how do you prove that what you're teaching session to session in those specific skills is actually getting you those element skills to the compound behaviors that are necessary to get to the point where you actually do have, or feel that you have, the autonomy in your life. And, I do think that that is a question, and, it's something that it comes up a lot. And when it does, we always allow ourselves to talk a little bit, and then we put the brakes on, because it's very, very difficult. Because I think for a company like CentralReach, ultimately, I think where we end up drawing the line in order to, continue doing what we need to do is just providing software that helps reduce friction and helps make the jobs of the people that are, using our services easier, and to provide the tools to do that. I think to get to the point where we can say our software can improve outcomes tangibly and can measure that, that feels like a great situation. And I'd love to say that, but that feels, I don't know if we'll get to that point.
Hey, Zach, what is your customer base? Are you focused more on the clinicians, or public school systems, private school systems, individuals, or what?
Sure.
Don't say all of the above.
It's not all of the above. It's mainly the clinicians. So the practices that are outside of the school system, usually their business models work with insurance companies, which is just a very difficult and terrible, honestly, situation to be in. So we try to, manage that to help them basically defend themselves and run their businesses. But at the same time, we also have, as we've grown, branched out and started expanding into other areas, which does include school systems. And so the software that I mentioned earlier, Lifted, I think that's majority, it started majority in private schools, but it's now shifting more towards public schools and school districts. For example, we have the Hawaii Department of Education and the New York City Department of Education that both use multiple of our products. They both use our assessments, and Hawaii uses a lot of them. So that, yeah.
And my guess is most, if not all of your software is on a subscription-based model rather than you're packaging up software for distribution.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it's usually priced, and it does vary, but some of them are priced on a per learner basis, and some of them are priced on a per user basis, but most of them are moving towards a per user.
I would like to comment, Zach, that I was just very impressed with the amount of knowledge that you've expressed about the handling of clients, the problems that clinicians face. This is not something that was in your educational background, was it?
That's true. No, when I was in school, I studied cognitive science and computer programming, which I think the cognitive science does help a little bit with the behavior aspects and a little bit actually now with the AI. But no, I didn't study for, to become a clinician or anything like that. I think some of the most helpful experiences that I've had that have helped, though, is just going to on-site visits and being able to, kind of watch as, the therapists are working and seeing some of the inefficiencies that they run into, and just talking to customers, basically every day. So them and the internal subject matter experts that have come from the field, I spend a lot of time, just kind of trying to learn from them and, hear about that. But yeah, I do my best.
Very good, very good. This is a kind of an invisible glue between the customer and somebody we think of as the programmer, that to understand the whole process of getting something that works the way the customer wants and needs there's a lot of people in between, and they have to understand what the customer is trying to do. And if the customer is somebody who's got their own customer, then there's a whole translation that's going on. And I think you described a lot of it very well, which I really appreciate. That as people who use computers, we don't know how many people there are between us and the thing we end up seeing on our screen. And we can curse it, or it can help us. And so what you described is terrific.
I'm just looking at the time now. I'm not putting pressure on anyone, but I know some people are going to start bailing out, and John's going to pull the plug. So I have to give at this point at least one thumbs up and a very good attaboy to Zach, in case we get cut off early. You did a hell of a job, Zach.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Nice job. Yes.
I
Exhausted questions for Zach. We should, I express my great appreciation. You gave the thumbs up, Andy. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing this with us. It is clearly a step into the future, a future that we will be. I don't know how many people here or in the club have family members or people they're associated with who are affected by autism or IDD or anything like that, but they all have clinicians who are trying to support them. And anything that one can do to support those clinicians is wonderful, is great. You want to help them to be able to help you because you don't know how to help yourself or your child or your relative or whoever it is. So this is a major positive contribution to the world. Thank you. Thank you so much.
John,
Good
Thank
night,
you.
all.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.